Delilah pressed both hands flat against her chest, trying to hold herself together. Literally, physically together. Because she was certain that if she let go, something inside her would crack open right there on that train platform and never close again. The letter had promised her a job, a room, a chance. Instead, the woman at the door had looked her up and down like something dragged in from the road and said, "We don't take your kind here," and then slammed the door so hard the windows shook. If this story already has your heart, hit that subscribe button, drop your city in the comments, and let's find out just how far this little tale can travel. Now let's go back to where it all began. The summer heat in Red Hollow, Texas didn't care who you were or where you came from. It pressed down on everything, on the tin rooftops, on the dry, cracked earth, on the people who'd lived there their whole lives, and on the strangers who made the mistake of thinking it might be a welcoming place. It settled on Delilah McCrae's shoulders like a punishment she hadn't earned, and she sat on the only bench outside the Red Hollow train depot, with her 2 bags between her feet and nowhere left to go. She'd read that letter 100 times, maybe 101. She had it memorized, every line, every comma, every careful word that Mrs. Hargrove Beaumont had written about needing a capable woman to help manage the household. Room and board provided, fair wages, immediate placement. Delilah had packed everything she owned into those 2 bags. She'd said goodbye to a town that hadn't bothered to say it back. She'd ridden 3 trains across 2 states in the July heat, and she'd walked up to that white house on Caldwell Street with her chin up and her heart full of something she hadn't let herself feel in a long time. Hope. Mrs. Beaumont had opened the door, looked at Delilah, really looked at her, and her expression shifted the way a door shifts before it slams. "I believe there's been a misunderstanding," the woman had said, her voice thick with something just shy of disgust. "Ma'am?" Delilah had kept her voice steady. She was practiced at that. "The position has been filled." The letter said, "I know what the letter said." Mrs. Beaumont's eyes had swept down Delilah's dress, her worn shoes, the bag strap cutting into her shoulder. "And I'm telling you, the position has been filled." Delilah had stood there for 1 full breath, 2, 3. Then she'd picked up her bags and walked back down those porch steps without another word. She'd heard the door close behind her before she even hit the bottom step. That had been 2 hours ago. Now she sat on the depot bench and counted what she had left. $4.60. Half a biscuit wrapped in cloth. 1 letter that no longer meant anything. And no train heading anywhere useful until morning. The depot agent, a thin man with a mustache that made him look permanently disapproving, had told her she couldn't wait inside. "We don't allow loitering," he'd said, not looking up from his ledger. "I'm not loitering. I'm waiting for a train." "Waiting outside costs nothing. You're welcome to that bench." She hadn't argued. Arguing cost energy she didn't have. So she sat. The afternoon baked down, and the dust from the main road carried with it the sounds of Red Hollow going about its business. Horses, wagon wheels, the distant laughter of people who belonged somewhere. A few people passed the depot. A couple of women glanced at her and looked away quickly, the way people look away from something that makes them uncomfortable. An older man walked by, slowed, seemed about to say something, then thought better of it and kept moving. Delilah unwrapped the biscuit and ate half of it slowly. She wasn't hungry, but she needed something to do with her hands. She was 26 years old. She had been on her own since she was 17. She had survived worse than this. She kept telling herself that, turning it over like a smooth stone in her palm. You have survived worse. She had, That was true. But surviving and living weren't the same thing, and she was bone tired of just surviving. She was folding the cloth back over the remaining half of the biscuit when she heard them. Two voices, high and fast, tumbling over each other like creek water over rocks. "But I want to see if there's any mail. Papa said stay close, Maggie." "I am close. I'm right here." Delilah looked up. Two girls came around the corner of the depot building at a dead run, identical in every feature that mattered. The same dark hair in the same tangled braids, the same sun-browned skin, the same exact shade of mud on the hem of each dress. They couldn't have been more than 6 years old. They pulled up short when they saw Delilah, and for a moment all three of them just looked at each other. Then the one who'd been called Maggie tipped her head to one side. "Who are you?" "My name's Delilah." "Why are you sitting out here?" "I'm waiting for a train." The other girl, smaller by perhaps half an inch, more serious in the eyes, glanced at the bags at Delilah's feet. "You got nowhere to go?" Delilah blinked. Children had a way of cutting straight to the bone. "I've got plenty of places to go," she said, which was technically not a lie, since the whole world was full of places. "I just haven't decided which one yet." The serious twin considered this. "That's what Papa says when he don't want us to worry." "Eli," Maggie said like a warning. "Well, it is." A shadow fell over all three of them, and Delilah looked up. He was tall, the kind of tall that meant you noticed him before you noticed anything else in the general vicinity. He had his hat in his hand, which she would come to understand was a habit, something he did when he was about to say something that mattered. His face was weathered in the way of men who spent most of their lives outdoors, and there was a seriousness to his eyes that was somehow not unkind. He looked at his daughters first, then at Delilah, and he didn't look away the way the others had. "Girls," he said, his voice low and unhurried. "What did I say about running ahead?" "You said don't," Maggie admitted. "And yet—" "We wanted to see if there was mail," Eli said, with the gravity of someone presenting a legal defense. "There ain't any mail." He set his hat back on his head and looked at Delilah again. "Beg your pardon, miss. They don't always— well, they don't always." He seemed to decide that was sufficient. "Griffin Hayes, these are my daughters, Magnolia and Eliza, who apparently go by whatever they please." "Maggie and Eli," Maggie confirmed. "Delilah McCrae." She stood, because it felt wrong to stay seated while he was standing. "Your girls are fine. They weren't any trouble." He glanced at her bags. His expression didn't change much, but something in it shifted. Not pity exactly, more like recognition. "You come in on the noon train?" "Yes, sir." "You headed somewhere, or just passing through?" She held his gaze. "I thought I was headed somewhere. Turned out I was wrong." Something moved through his eyes, quick, there and gone. He turned the brim of his hat once between his fingers. "Beaumont House?" he asked. Delilah felt a cold pulse of surprise. "You know about that?" "Small town. Word gets around." He paused. "Hargrove Beaumont's wife has turned away 4 women in the last 6 months. All of them came in on the train. All of them left the same way." "That's—" Delilah stopped herself. She had a word for it, but it wasn't a polite one. "That's a hard thing to know after the fact." "It is." He wasn't making excuses for the woman. He was just saying it was true. "You got people here in Red Hollow? Anyone expecting you?" "No." "Hotel?" She glanced down at her bag, where $4.60 were not going to last long in any town. "Not yet." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked at his daughters, who were both watching him with the attentive stillness of children who'd learned that the important things happened in quiet moments. He crouched down to their level, spoke low enough that Delilah couldn't hear the words exactly. She caught something like, "What do you think?" and one of the twins saying, "Yes, Papa," with a certainty that seemed to surprise even her sister. He stood back up, turned the brim of his hat once more. Then he said, "Miss McCrae, I've got a proposition, and I want you to understand it comes from nothing but a practical need. And you can say no without it meaning anything other than no." Delilah straightened. "I'm listening." "I run the Hayes Ranch, about 4 miles out. It's a working spread. Cattle, horses, some crop. My housekeeper, Mrs. Aldine, had to go back east 3 weeks ago. Family trouble. I've been managing the girls and the house on top of everything else since then. And I am—" he paused, choosing the word carefully. "Losing ground." "You need a housekeeper." "I need someone who can be in the house with the girls while I'm working. Cook, manage the household, keep them from destroying things." A very faint shift in his expression, almost a smile, aimed down at Maggie, who looked extremely innocent about whatever she'd recently destroyed. "It's honest work. Room and board, same as what Beaumont offered, plus wages. Month trial period for both of us, so either party can walk away clean if it doesn't suit." Delilah looked at him, then at the girls. Maggie had grabbed her twin's hand without seeming to notice she'd done it, and Eli was looking at Delilah with those 2 old eyes that made her chest hurt a little. "Papa's a good cook," Eli offered, apparently feeling the negotiation could use some assistance. "He just don't have enough time." "That's not—" Griffin Hayes pinched the bridge of his nose briefly. "That is not the relevant point, Eliza." "It's a good point," Maggie said loyally. Delilah almost smiled. She caught it before it fully formed, pressed it back down. She had learned a long time ago that smiling too quickly made people think you were simple or desperate, and she was neither. She was, however, standing on a train platform in a strange town with $4.60 and no plan, which was close enough to desperate to warrant consideration. "I appreciate the offer, Mr. Hayes," she said carefully. "I want to be straightforward with you. I've done housekeeping work, and I'm capable. But I don't know you, and you don't know me, and I'd want to understand what you're expecting before I agree to anything." "That's fair. And I'd want it understood that my arrangement is professional. I'm an employee, not—" She chose her own words with the same care he'd used. "Not anything else." Something shifted in his eyes then, something that looked like it might have been the beginning of something complicated, but he kept his face even. "That is also fair," and agreed. "And if at any point the situation isn't what you represented it to be, I'd want it understood that I'll leave. No hard feelings, no trouble. But I'll leave." "Miss McCrae," he said, "I'll be honest. The last woman who was straight with me was my wife, and she died 3 years ago this August. I have no interest in anything but a fair arrangement." He let that sit for a moment. "And neither do I have any interest in making your situation harder than it already is." Delilah looked at the girls again. Eli was still holding her sister's hand, and both of them were very still. The way children go still when they're trying very hard not to influence a grown-up's decision, while also influencing it with everything they had. She picked up her bags. "Month trial," she said. "Both parties walk away clean if it doesn't work." "Yes, ma'am. And I want to know what happened to your wife. Not today, but before the month's out, I want to know. Because if there's something I need to understand about this household, I'd rather hear it from you than piece it together myself." Griffin Hayes looked at her for a long, steady moment. Then he nodded, once. "That's a reasonable thing to ask." Maggie tugged the hem of his jacket. Does she get Mrs. Aldine's room? Maggie. It's the one with the window that faces the creek. It's the nicest one, she informed Delilah helpfully. I put a flower in it last week, but Eli said it died. It was dead when you put it there, Eli said, with the resignation of someone who'd had this conversation before. It was not completely dead. Delilah looked down at them. Something moved through her, quiet and dangerous, some feeling she didn't have a name for that she could tell she wasn't ready to examine. She looked away before it could take hold. Lead the way, Mr. Hayes, she said. The wagon was pulled around front. A working wagon, not fancy, with a good solid horse that flicked her ears at Delilah when she approached and seemed to accept her. Griffin Hayes loaded her bags in the back with an efficiency that said this was not a man who made a performance of simple things. He helped the girls up first, both of them scrambling over each other to get to the seat behind him, and then he held out his hand for Delilah. She hesitated for just a moment. That hand, calloused and steady, and offered without comment. And then she took it and climbed up. The depot agent came out onto the platform as they pulled away. He watched them go with an expression Delilah recognized. The kind of expression people wore when they decided she was someone else's problem now and were relieved about it. She didn't look back at him. She looked forward, at the road, at the heat shimmer rising off the flat Texas ground, at the sky that went on forever in every direction. Miss Delilah, Maggie said from directly behind her, close enough that she could feel the child's breath on her neck. Do you know how to braid hair? Maggie, Griffin Hayes started. I'm asking a reasonable question, Papa. It's all right, Delilah said. She glanced back. Maggie's braids were, if she was being honest, in a state of significant disrepair. Eli's were slightly better, but only marginally. Something squeezed in her chest, quiet and sharp all at once. I do know how to braid hair. Maggie sat back with a satisfaction so complete it was almost audible. Eli looked at her sister, then at Delilah, and in those two old eyes something shifted. A small, careful movement, like a door opened just a crack to let in light. Griffin Hayes kept his eyes on the road, but she noticed his grip on the reins ease slightly, something coming out of his shoulders that she suspected had been there for a long time. The road unrolled ahead of them. The summer heat pressed down on everything, and Delilah McCrae, who had not had a home in 9 years, held her back straight and her eyes forward, and kept very, very still, around the feeling she couldn't yet afford to name. 3 miles from the depot, Maggie fell asleep against her sister's shoulder. Eli stayed awake, watching the land with those serious eyes. Griffin Hayes said nothing for a long stretch, and Delilah appreciated that. She had met too many people who filled silence like it was a hole that needed patching. When he did speak, it was without preamble. The ranch hands eat breakfast at 6. I can't always get back to the house at midday, but I try. Dinner's at 7. All right. Girls get up at 5:30 most mornings. Maggie moves fast. Eli moves slow. Don't take it personal. It's just how she is in the morning. A pause. Don't let Maggie near the chickens unsupervised. She means well. Understood. The well pump sticks on the left side. You have to hold it down and pull at the same time. He seemed to think. The stove burns a little hot on the right side. Left front burner's the reliable one. Mr. Hayes. Yes, ma'am? I've managed households before. I'll figure out the stove. Another near smile. Just a shift at the corner of his mouth. Yes, ma'am. They rode in silence a little longer. Eli had tucked her chin down toward her sleeping sister, and the afternoon was tilting toward late, the worst of the heat finally thinking about letting up. Miss McCrae, Griffin Hayes said, still looking at the road. Yes? What I said back there, about my twins needing... He stopped. started again. I want to be clear that I'm not asking you to be anything to them other than a steady presence. They've had too many people come and go. I don't intend to add to that. But they... Another pause, and this one had something in it she hadn't heard from him yet. Something that cost him something to admit. They need someone in that house who's there, who shows up, who sees them. He cleared his throat. That's all I mean. Delilah looked at his profile. The line of his jaw, the way he held himself, shoulders square, hands steady, the posture of a man who'd been carrying things alone for long enough that he'd forgotten he was doing it. I understand, she said. I just wanted to be plain about it. You were plain. I appreciate that. The ranch came into view then. A long, low house, a barn, corrals, the flat spread of summer-browned grass. Delilah took it in without comment, cataloging, not letting herself feel anything about it yet. It was too soon to feel anything about it. But she noticed, as Griffin Hayes turned the wagon through the gate, that somewhere just past the main house, a line of cottonwood trees caught the last of the afternoon light, and the breeze moved through them in a long silver wave, and the sound of it, soft and steady and alive, was the most beautiful thing she had heard in longer than she could easily remember. She didn't say that. She looked at the road, and she kept herself still, and she breathed. One night, she told herself, that was all she had agreed to. She would stay one night, assess the situation with clear eyes, and make a sensible decision in the morning. One night. Eli stirred awake as the wagon pulled up to the house, blinked at Delilah with those ancient child eyes, and said, quietly and with complete seriousness, I'm glad you came. Delilah kept her face even. It was harder than it should have been. Eli's words followed Delilah through the front door and wouldn't let go. I'm glad you came. 6 words, 3 seconds. And they had rattled something loose inside her chest that she was not prepared to deal with. So she did what she always did with things she wasn't prepared to deal with. She found something useful to do with her hands. The kitchen told her everything about Griffin Hayes in under 2 minutes. The cast iron was well seasoned and hung in the right order. The flour bin was full. The coffee pot was the kind that had seen 10 years of hard daily use, and was better for it. But the dishes were stacked wrong, shoved in rather than placed, and there was a mended crack in the table leg held together with wire. And the curtain rod over the window was hanging at an angle that said someone had reached for it and missed, and just left it that way. A man doing his best with not enough hands. She recognized it because she had lived it. You can leave your bags by the stairs, Griffin said, coming in behind her. I'll show you the room. In a minute. She was already opening the cold box, cataloging. Butter, good. Eggs, plenty. A cut of salt pork. Have the girls eaten since midday? A pause. They had biscuits around noon. And it's past 6. She pulled out the eggs. Do they have preferences, or do they eat what's put in front of them? They eat what's put in front of them, Griffin said firmly. At the exact same moment, Maggie appeared in the doorway and said, I don't like onions. You'll eat onions, Griffin said. I'll eat them, but I won't like them. That's all anyone's asking. Delilah hid the smile this time more successfully. She cracked the first egg. Go wash your hands, she said to Maggie, without turning around. Both of you. And don't tell me they're already clean. A pause. Then small feet retreated down the hallway. Griffin Hayes stood in the middle of his own kitchen and said nothing for a moment. Then, and she heard the weight of it, how much it cost a proud man to say this. Thank you. She didn't make a thing of it. You can set the table if you want something to do. He set the table. She cooked. The girls came back with damp hands and set themselves down and watched her with the particular focused attention of children who had learned not to trust good things too quickly. who waited to see if the good thing would turn out to be real. Delilah understood that. She kept her movements steady, unhurried, and she didn't talk too much. The eggs came out right. The salt pork sizzled properly. She found cornbread from that morning, still good, and warmed it. When she set the plates down, Maggie looked at hers and then looked up at Delilah with an expression that was suspicious and hopeful in equal measure. "You didn't put onions in," Maggie said. "There weren't any onions to put in." "Oh," Maggie considered this. "That's lucky." "Sure is," Delilah said. Eli said nothing. She picked up her fork, took a bite, and then looked across the table at her father with an expression that communicated something Delilah couldn't fully read. Something between "see" and "I told you," and something else. Something quieter and more private than either of those things. Griffin looked back at his daughter and gave a small, single nod. Delilah sat down at the end of the table and picked up her own fork and told herself very firmly that she was not going to cry over scrambled eggs and cornbread in a stranger's kitchen. She had more dignity than that. It was a near thing. After supper, Griffin showed her the room. It did face the creek, same as Maggie had said. The window was open, and there was a dried flower on the sill. Not completely dead, but close. And the room was plain and clean, and smelled like cedar from the chest in the corner. There was a quilt on the bed, in a log cabin pattern, worn soft with age, the colors faded to something gentle. "Mrs. Aldine made that," Griffin said from the doorway. "She left it, said she had too many quilts at home." Delilah touched the edge of it. "It's beautiful work." "She was here 11 years. The girls, especially Eli, she took it hard when she left." He was quiet for a moment. "I want you to know that's not a burden I'm putting on you. I'm just telling you so you understand why Eli's careful." "She's protecting herself," Delilah said. "Yes." "That's sensible. She's a sensible child." Something crossed his face. Pride, and under the pride, something raw. "She is. She's... yes." He cleared his throat. "There's water in the pitcher. I'll be up before 5 if you need anything." "Mr. Hayes," she turned. "Your wife. You said you'd tell me before the month was out." He went very still. "I told you I want to understand this household," she said. "I'm not asking to be cruel. I'm asking because I've walked into situations before without the full picture, and it cost me." She kept her voice even. "You don't have to tell me tonight, but soon." Griffin Hayes looked at her for a long moment. He had the kind of eyes that didn't look away from things, she'd noticed. Whatever he wasn't a man who flinched from being seen. "Her name was Catherine," he said. "She died 3 years ago, August. Fever. It came fast, and it didn't leave her much time." A breath. "The girls were 3. They remember her in pieces. Eli more than Maggie, I think, though neither of them talks about it much." He was holding the doorframe like a man keeping himself in place. "The hardest part, the part I live with, is that she knew it was coming before I let myself know. And she spent her last good days trying to tell me things she thought I'd need to hear later." His jaw tightened. "I wasn't ready to hear them." Delilah didn't fill the silence. She had learned that some silences needed to be left alone. "One of the things she told me," he said, quieter now, "was not to let the girls grow up without a woman in the house who gave a damn about them." His voice came out rougher on the last words. "I've been trying to honor that." "You brought 4 women out here from the station," Delilah said. "Not an accusation, just the fact." 3. You're the 4th, he met her eyes. "And the first one the girls came running toward." That landed somewhere deep. She didn't let it show. "Get some sleep, Mr. Hayes," she said. "You look like a man who hasn't slept properly in 3 weeks." The corner of his mouth moved. "That's an accurate assessment." He tipped his hat. Old habit, she already recognized it, and stepped back from the doorway. "Good night, Miss McCrae." "Good night." She listened to his boots on the stairs, then to the quiet of the house settling around her. She sat on the edge of the bed and put her hands in her lap and looked at the dried flower on the windowsill. "I'm glad you came." One night, she reminded herself. She'd agreed to one night. She blew out the lamp and lay down and listened to the cottonwoods outside the window. And she was asleep faster than she'd been in months, which was either a good sign or the kind of dangerous thing that looked like a good sign. She didn't let herself decide which. She woke at 5:15 without any help from anyone. Old habit, older than she could properly account for. She dressed quickly, splashed water on her face, and was in the kitchen with the stove lit before she heard the first set of feet on the stairs. She already knew by the speed, fast, no pause, that it was Maggie. "You're up," Maggie said, arriving in the kitchen doorway like a small force of weather. Her left braid had come half undone overnight and was listing sideways at a significant angle. "I am. Don't touch the stove." "I know not to touch the stove." "Good." Maggie climbed into her chair and put both elbows on the table and watched Delilah with the focused attention she was already learning to expect. "Did you sleep all right?" "I did. Did you?" "I woke up once, but then I went back to sleep." A pause. "I sometimes have bad dreams." Delilah kept her hands moving. Coffee first, then the oats. "What kind of bad dreams?" "Ones where Papa doesn't come back from the far pasture." Maggie said it simply, without drama, the way children delivered the things that frightened them most. "It's not real, though. He always comes back." "He does," Delilah said steadily. "Mrs. Aldine used to say that some people are the kind who always come back." Maggie propped her chin on her hand. "Are you the kind who comes back?" The question hit Delilah between the ribs. She kept the coffee moving. "I'm here right now," she said carefully. "That's what I can promise." Maggie studied her, the way a child studies something she isn't sure about yet. Then, apparently deciding this was sufficient, she said, "Eli thinks you're going to stay." "Eli doesn't know that." "Eli feels it. She's different from me. I think things, and she feels things." Maggie said this without envy, as a simple statement of natural law. "She said last night when we were in bed that you smell like someone who's been traveling a long time, but was trying to get somewhere real." Delilah was very glad she was facing the stove. "That's a complicated thing to smell," she said, when she trusted her voice. "Eli's complicated," Maggie confirmed. The slower footsteps on the stairs were Eli. She arrived in the kitchen, still half assembled, one boot on, one in hand, and stopped when she saw Delilah at the stove. Something moved through her face, quick and guarded, and then quickly smoothed over. She sat down, pulled on her second boot, and said, without looking up, "Good morning." "Good morning, Eli." A pause. Then, very quietly, like she was testing the weight of it, "Good morning, Miss Delilah." Griffin came through the back door at 5:40, already carrying the smell of the barn, his hat pushed back on his head. He stopped in the kitchen doorway and looked at the table where both girls were seated, at the oats and the coffee and the biscuits she'd made from last night's flour. And something in his face went through a change she almost looked away from because it felt too private to witness. He pulled his hat off instead. "You didn't have to do all this." "Eating's practical," she said. "Sit down, Mr. Hayes." He sat. He ate. He didn't make a fuss about any of it, which she appreciated more than she'd expected to. There was a kind of man who made a performance out of gratitude, and a kind who just received things cleanly. And he was the second kind. They were halfway through breakfast when Eli looked up from her oats and said, without preamble, "Are you going to leave like Mrs. Aldine did?" Griffin put down his fork. "Eli, I'm asking because I want to know," Eli said, with a firmness that belonged to someone 3 times her age. "People leave and nobody tells us why. They just go. And then Papa's sad and he thinks we can't tell, but we can tell. So I want to know." The kitchen was very quiet. Delilah looked at Eli. Those serious, ancient eyes, that small jaw set like something had calcified there. A child who had decided that being prepared for loss was better than being surprised by it. She knew that jaw. She had worn it herself. She had worn it since she was 8 years old, and her mother's promises had stopped meaning what promises were supposed to mean. "I can't promise you forever," she said. "I won't do that because it wouldn't be honest, and I think you're too smart for promises that aren't honest." Eli held very still. "What I can promise is that if something changes, if I'm going to leave, I'll tell you before I go. You'll know. It won't just happen." Delilah kept her eyes on the child and her voice level. "No one will disappear on you. Not from me." Something cracked open in Eli's face. Just for a moment, a flash of something raw and young and desperate that she was already learning to hide. Then she pressed her lips together and looked down at her oats. "Okay," she said, small, quiet. Griffin Hayes picked up his fork. His hand, Delilah noticed, wasn't entirely steady. She found her footing in the house the way she always had, by paying attention to the things people didn't say. The wire holding the table leg told her he hadn't asked for help with it. Too proud, or too tired, or both. The curtain rod told her he noticed the house was coming apart and hadn't had time to stop it. The laundry pile behind the washroom door told her 3 weeks of barely managing. She didn't fix everything at once. That would have been the wrong kind of help. The kind that makes a person feel like a problem being solved. She fixed the table leg because it was a safety issue, and she did it quietly while Griffin was out at the barn and didn't mention it. She straightened the curtain rod because it took 30 seconds. She started the laundry because the girls were going to run out of clean dresses by Thursday. By mid-morning, Maggie had attached herself to Delilah's general orbit, the way a small, chaotic planet attaches itself to something with more gravity. She talked constantly about the horses, about a girl at church named Rosie who had said something unforgivable about Eli's braid, about whether rabbits could be trained to come when called, about what she thought clouds were made of. Delilah answered the questions that had answers and left the others breathe. Eli kept her distance. She was in the house, nearby, but she found tasks of her own, straightening her room, reading on the porch, bringing in the eggs from the hen house, with a seriousness that suggested she took her responsibilities to the chickens personally. She didn't seek Delilah out, but she didn't leave the room when Delilah entered it either. That was something. The crisis came at 11:45, as crises do, without warning, and from a completely unexpected direction. Maggie came through the back door at a flat run, her face a complicated mixture of triumph and preemptive guilt that Delilah recognized as the expression of someone who had done something they knew was going to be a problem, but had done it anyway. "I found something," Maggie said. "Where?" "In the tall grass by the south fence." Delilah dried her hands. "What kind of something?" Maggie opened both hands. In them, trembling, eyes barely open, was the smallest rabbit Delilah had ever seen. A baby, a few weeks old at most, so young it was still more potential than actual rabbit, its ears translucent and its heartbeat visible in its tiny chest. "Maggie," Delilah said carefully, "I know I wasn't supposed to go past the fence, You weren't supposed to go past the fence. But I heard something, and it was just there, and I couldn't leave it. Maggie's voice had developed a wobble that she was fighting hard. It's going to die if we don't do something, Miss Delilah. I can tell.
I can just tell.
Eli appeared in the doorway behind her sister, drawn by some twin sense for when something important was happening. She looked at the rabbit, then at Maggie's face, then at Delilah. Can we save it? Eli asked. Just that. No performance, no manipulation. Just the straight question. Delilah looked at the rabbit. She looked at the two faces watching her. Maggie's desperate hope, Eli's careful, guarded, wanting to hope. Something in her chest moved with a slow tectonic weight. Bring it to the table, she said. Carefully. Maggie let out a breath so large her whole body moved with it. They spent the next 40 minutes doing what could be done. Warmth, a cloth dampened with a little diluted cow's milk that Delilah had Eli fetch from the cold box. The slow, patient work of coaxing something fragile back from an edge. Delilah showed Maggie how to hold it. Cradled, supported, the heart beat against the palm. She showed Eli how to offer the milk on a cloth corner, just a drop at a time, nothing forced. Griffin came in at noon and stood in the kitchen doorway, looking at the three of them bent over the table, and he didn't say a word about the fence. He caught Delilah's eye over the girls' heads. She gave a small shake of her head. Not yet. Let them have this. And he read it exactly right, because he stepped back out and came back in 5 minutes later, making more noise on the steps so the girls knew he was coming. And he walked in and said, "What have you got there?" "We're saving it," Maggie said, not looking up. "Miss Delilah knows how." He looked at Delilah. She was already looking at the rabbit, guiding Eli's hand, saying something quiet about the pressure of the cloth. He stood there in his own kitchen, in the middle of his ordinary noon, watching this woman who had arrived yesterday with 2 bags and nowhere to go, bent over a nearly dead rabbit with his daughters on either side of her, all 3 of them breathing in the same careful rhythm. And Griffin Hayes, who was not a man who surprised easily, felt something shift in his chest, heavy and irreversible, like a stone turning over in deep water, slow and final, and leaving something exposed underneath that had been covered for a long, cold time. He sat down at the table. He didn't say anything. He just sat, and he watched, and he let himself be in the room. Maggie looked up at him briefly, radiant with the specific joy of a child doing something important. "It's going to be okay, Papa," she said. "I can tell." He looked at his daughter. He looked at Delilah, who was still not looking at him, still focused on the task, still holding herself with that careful, practiced stillness he was beginning to understand was not coldness at all, but the posture of a woman who had learned to protect the things that mattered by not letting anyone see how much they mattered. "Yeah," he said, his voice coming out lower than he intended. "I think you might be right." Delilah heard it. She kept her eyes on the rabbit, and she kept her hands steady, and she absolutely did not let herself turn around. But she felt something give way, deep in the place she'd been holding tightest, like the first creak of a door that has been shut for a very long time. Not open yet, not even close to open, but the lock, at least, had shifted. Just the lock. For now, that was enough. The rabbit lived through the night. Delilah knew because she checked it twice, once at midnight and once at 4 in the morning. Quiet trips down the stairs in her stocking feet, guided by habit and something else she wasn't naming yet. She found it both times in the box Maggie had lined with a dishcloth, breathing in small, steady pulls, its heartbeat no longer panicked, but settled into something that felt like decision, like it had made up its mind. She went back to bed the second time and lay there in the dark and thought about decisions. She had told herself one night. Then she had told herself the month trial, both parties walk away clean. She had been very precise about her terms, very careful, very professional, because precision and care were the tools she used to keep herself from wanting things she couldn't afford to want. The problem was that somewhere between Eli saying, "I'm glad you came," and Maggie's rabbit breathing in that dishcloth box, her precision had started to feel less like armor and more like something she was wearing in a house that was too warm for it. She was still thinking about this when she heard the front door. Not the back door. The back door was ranch business, boots and barn smells, normal hours. The front door was different. The front door, at 5 in the morning, was something that made her sit up. She heard Griffin's voice, low and controlled. The way a man keeps his voice when he's working hard to keep it. Then another voice, a man's, louder, with a particular volume of someone who decided volume was authority. Delilah sat still for 3 seconds. Then she got up. She stopped at the top of the stairs. Below, through the half-open front door, she could see Griffin standing on the porch, one hand braced on the doorframe, his back to her. On the porch steps stood a man she hadn't seen before. Heavy-set, well-dressed in the way that some men in small towns were well-dressed, meaning the clothes were expensive and the manners weren't. "My offer stands, Hayes. It has stood for 2 years, and my patience is not unlimited." "Your patience," Griffin said, "is your business. My land is mine." "Your land," the man said, "is mortgaged to a bank that I happen to have some influence with. That's just a fact worth keeping in mind." "I'm keeping it in mind. Good morning, Alderman Croft." Griffin, "Good morning," Griffin said again, harder this time, and closed the door. He stood with his hand on the door a moment before he turned. When he saw Delilah on the stairs, something moved through his face. Not embarrassment exactly. More like the look of a man who'd been managing something in the dark and had just been caught in a light he hadn't expected. "I apologize if that woke you," he said. "Who is Alderman Croft?" A pause. He took his hat off. That habit again. The one that meant he was about to say something that cost him something. "A man who wants this land. Has for 2 years. The mortgage." She came down 2 more steps. "Is it bad?" His jaw tightened. "It's manageable." "That's not what I asked." He looked at her for a moment with that direct, unflinching gaze, and she held it, because she'd meant what she said. She wasn't going to piece together the picture herself. She needed the full thing. "It was bad last year," he said, finally. "Drought hit the hay crop, and I had to choose between the cattle feed and the mortgage payment. I chose the cattle." He turned the brim of his hat once. "I've been catching up since. But catching up takes time, and Croft has been circling this property since before Catherine died." The name came out tight, controlled. He knew she was sick before I was willing to admit it. "He came to me when she had 2 weeks left and offered to buy." Griffin's voice went flat. "I told him what I thought of that offer." Delilah descended the last 2 steps and stood in the hallway and said, "He's going to come back." "He always comes back." "Does he have the bank?" "He has influence with the bank. There's a difference." Griffin's eyes met hers. "Though the difference gets smaller the longer I'm behind." She stood with that for a moment. Then she said, "You should have told me this yesterday." "I told you everything relevant to your employment." "A man trying to take this ranch from you is relevant to my employment," she said, "because it affects the stability of this household, which affects those girls, which is exactly what you hired me to help protect." The silence that followed had a different quality than the silences before. Heavier, more honest. "You're right," he said. The admission came without resistance, which told her something about him. That he could be corrected by the right argument. That his pride wasn't bigger than his sense. "You're right. I should have told you." "Tell me the rest of it." All of it, not just the parts you think I can handle." Something shifted in his eyes. Not the stone-turning shift of the night before. This was smaller, more immediate. Something like the recognition of being spoken to as an equal. "After breakfast," he said. "Let me get the girls up first." She nodded and went to start the coffee. Maggie came downstairs at 5:30 and went straight to the rabbit box before she said good morning to anyone, which Delilah had expected. The sound Maggie made when she saw it was still breathing, a small, compressed, whole-body sound of relief, was the kind of thing that reached inside a person's chest and rearranged the furniture. "It's better," Maggie said. "Miss Delilah, it's better." "It ate a little in the night." Maggie spun around. "You checked on it?" "Twice." Maggie stared at her with an expression so open and undefended that Delilah had to look away from it, back at the stove, back at the coffee, back at something she could manage. Eli came down at 5:45 and read her sister's face the way she always did, in one long, quiet look, and then looked at Delilah's back and said nothing. But she sat down at her place at the table, and when Delilah set the coffee down, she said, "Thank you, Miss Delilah," in a voice that meant something larger than coffee. Griffin came in from the barn at 6. He washed his hands at the sink, sat down, accepted his cup, and then said to his daughters in the careful tone of a man delivering information rather than alarm, "Alderman Croft came by this morning." Maggie's face went sharp. What did he want? Same thing he always wants. "The ranch," Eli said flatly. "Yes." Eli picked up her fork. Her face had gone to the controlled, calcified expression, the prepared-for-loss expression that Delilah knew too well. "Is he going to get it?" "No," Griffin said. "Just that. No softening, no qualification. The clean certainty of a man who needed his children to hear the word without a hedge around it." Eli looked at him for a long moment. Something in her face decided something. She went back to her eggs. Delilah watched this family and kept her own face even and drank her coffee and told herself very firmly that she was a professional woman with a month trial period and clear terms, and she was absolutely not going to let herself get tangled up in any of this. She was considerably less convincing than she used to be. Griffin told her the rest of it after the girls went out to do morning chores. He sat at the kitchen table with both hands around his cup and talked in the same direct, no-performance way he did everything, and she listened. The mortgage was 8 months behind at its worst. He'd gotten it down to 3 months behind by selling off a portion of the South Pasture herd, a decision he'd hated but made. Croft had been buying up land along the Eastern Valley for 4 years, and the Hayes Ranch sat in the middle of what Croft apparently considered his by inevitability. The bank's primary man was a fellow named Harker, who had, according to Griffin, been to Croft's house for dinner at least 6 times in the last year. "So the bank isn't neutral," Delilah said. "The bank is a business. Croft is the kind of man who makes himself useful to businesses." "And if you miss another payment?" "There's a 60-day clause. 2 missed payments, and they can call the note." Delilah put her cup down. "Griffin," she used his name without thinking about it, and only noticed she'd done it when she saw the slight movement in his face. "How far behind are you right now?" 1 month. "And when is the next payment due?" 32 days. "And the cash situation?" His jaw moved. "Tight." "How tight?" He looked at her directly. "I can make it, if the summer cattle sale goes through at the price I'm counting on." "And if it doesn't?" "I'll make it anyway," he said, with a quiet finality that was not stubbornness, but something harder. The bone-deep determination of a man who had decided this piece of land was what stood between his children and nothing, and was going to protect it with everything he had. Delilah looked at him across the table. She had no business feeling what she was feeling right now, which was approximately equal parts respect and the specific, dangerous tenderness that comes from watching a person refuse to break. She filed all of it away behind the professional wall and said, "Then we'll make sure the household costs stay low for the next 30 days. I can stretch a food budget. I've done it before." He blinked. Whatever he'd expected her to say, it wasn't that. "Miss McCrae." "Delilah," she said, surprising herself again. A pause. "Delilah." Her name, in his voice, had a weight she wasn't prepared for. "You don't have to take on— I'm not taking on anything that isn't already in my job," she said briskly. "Managing this household means managing it well. That includes the budget. Let me do my job." He held her gaze for a long moment. Then quietly, "All right." Outside, Maggie screamed. Not a hurt scream. Delilah had already learned the difference in 12 hours, which was something. But the loud, outraged scream of someone who had been wronged. Both she and Griffin were out the back door in seconds. Maggie was standing in the yard, hands on hips, leveling an accusation at one of the ranch hands, a young man of about 19, who was trying very hard not to laugh. "He let Chester out," Maggie announced, pointing. "He left the gate open, and Chester got out, and now Chester is in the tomato garden again." Chester, it emerged, was a goat. Chester was in the tomato garden. Chester was eating a tomato with the serene, unbothered confidence of an animal who had done this before and expected to do it again. "Maggie," Griffin said. "He did it on purpose," Maggie said. "I did not," the ranch hand said, losing the battle with the laugh. "Your face says you did." "Maggie." Griffin's voice had the specific weight of a man trying to keep a straight face. "Go get Chester." "He should have to get Chester. He's the one—" "Magnolia." Maggie went to get Chester. She retrieved the goat with an air of profound martyrdom, hauling it by the collar back toward its enclosure, while Chester ate a second tomato en route. And Maggie expressed her feelings about this in terms that made Griffin pinch the bridge of his nose. Delilah stood next to Griffin in the yard and watched this, and felt something break open in her that she had been keeping very carefully sealed. Not sadness. It was the opposite of sadness, which was why it was so hard to manage. Joy with no warning is harder to handle than grief. Grief you can brace for. Joy just arrives. She laughed. It came out before she could stop it. Real laughter, not the polite kind, not the managed kind, but the helpless kind that takes over your shoulders and your whole face. She put her hand over her mouth a half-second too late. Griffin looked at her. She couldn't read his expression completely. She was still getting the language of his face. But there was something in it that was stripped entirely of its usual careful control. Open in a way she suspected he didn't often allow. "I'm sorry," she said when she had herself back. "Don't be." His voice was different. Not softer exactly. Something had gone out of the careful management of it. "Don't apologize for that." She looked at him. He looked at her. Somewhere across the yard, Maggie was informing Chester in graphic terms what would happen if he entered the tomato garden again. And Eli had appeared from the henhouse to observe the proceedings with calm, judicial interest. Delilah looked away first. She had to. The alternative was something she wasn't ready for. The trouble arrived at 2 o'clock in the shape of a buggy. Not Croft this time. A woman, middle-aged, expensively dressed, the kind of woman who wore her money in the set of her chin. She pulled up to the front of the house and didn't wait for anyone to come out, just stepped down and rapped twice on the door with the confidence of someone who had never in her life had a door not open quickly enough. Delilah opened it. The woman looked her up and down in one practiced sweep. The same sweep Mrs. Beaumont had given her at the door in town, though this one was operating on different calculations. Not dismissal, something more precise. "You must be the new housekeeper," the woman said. "I'm Delilah McCrae. Can I help you?" "Martha Dunmore. I'm on the Ladies' Aid Committee for Red Hollow First Methodist." She said this as though it were a rank. "Is Griffin Hayes available?" "I'll get him." Delilah found Griffin at the barn. He came back to the house with his hat in his hand and the expression of a man who already knew what this was about. He was right. Martha Dunmore sat in the front room and explained, with the precise language of a woman who had chosen her words in advance, that several members of the community had expressed concern about the arrangement at the Hayes Ranch. A single man, an unmarried woman, 2 young girls. "People talk," she said. "I'm sure you understand." "I do understand," Griffin said. His voice was even. His hands were quiet. "And I'd be grateful if you'd tell those people that Miss McCrae is my employee, hired to manage this household and care for my children. There's nothing further to understand." "Griffin, I'm not here to—" "I know why you're here, Martha." Still even, still quiet. "And I appreciate that you came yourself rather than sending a note. But there is nothing in this arrangement that is any business of the Aid Committee or anyone else in Red Hollow. My daughters are cared for. My house is managed. That's all." Martha Dunmore looked at him for a long moment. Then she looked at Delilah, who had remained in the doorway, not hiding, not advancing, just present, and her expression went through something complicated. Not quite respect. The beginning of recalculation. "People will still talk," she said. "People will talk regardless," Griffin said. "That's not something either of us can change." Martha stood, smoothed her skirt, and picked up her bag. At the door she paused. She looked at Delilah again, that recalculating look, and said, with the careful precision of a woman who very occasionally said exactly what she meant, "You're not what I expected." Delilah held her gaze. "I generally aim for that, ma'am." Something shifted in the woman's face. Something that might, eventually, become something less hostile. Then she left. Her buggy pulled away down the road, and Griffin closed the door and stood with his hand on it exactly as he had with Croft's door that morning. The same posture, the same moment of letting something land. "Does that happen often?" Delilah asked. "More since Catherine died." He turned. "She wasn't wrong that people talk." "I know people talk." "It could make things uncomfortable for you in town." Delilah looked at him steadily. "Mr. Hayes, Griffin, I was turned away from a job because of who I am, before I even unpacked my bags. I'm not new to people talking." She kept her voice even, but something moved behind it. Something with an edge she rarely let show. "Let them talk. I know what I'm here to do." He held her gaze for a moment, and then something happened in his face that she hadn't seen there before. Not the stripped-open look from the yard, not the stone-turning shift from the kitchen, but something quieter and more considered, like a man seeing something and deciding to see it all the way. "I know you do," he said, "and I want you to know. What I said to Martha, about there being nothing further to understand, that is true. I would never—" He stopped, started again. "I hired you because my daughters needed someone. That is the whole of it. You have my word on that." Delilah heard the word clearly. She heard everything under it, too. The care he was taking to give her the line, to put it in writing, so to speak, to make sure she knew that this arrangement was what he'd said it was, and nothing that could trap her. A man drawing a boundary, not to protect himself, but to protect her. She had not met many men who did that. "I believe you," she said. And she did. She believed him, and that was its own kind of dangerous. Because the part of her that had spent 9 years not believing men when they were kind to her was going very quiet all of a sudden. The way a wound goes quiet when something is actually healing it. The way silence isn't absence, but something fuller. She turned back toward the kitchen before he could see any of that on her face. "The girls need lunch," she said, "and I want to check on the rabbit." Behind her, she heard him breathe out, long and slow, like a man who had been holding something and had just, for one moment, been allowed to set it down. "Delilah," he said. She stopped. "Thank you. For this morning. For—" a pause that held more than the word could carry. "All of it." She stood with her hand on the kitchen doorframe and felt the full, complicated weight of where she was and who she was becoming in this house, in this strange and warm and terrifying place. And she said, quietly, steadily, meaning every syllable, "Don't thank me yet." She went to make lunch. She didn't look back. But she was smiling, and she let herself have that, small and private, just for a moment. Just that. The smile lasted about 4 hours. That was how long it took for Delilah to go from standing in the kitchen, feeling something tentatively, cautiously, terrifyingly, like hope, to sitting at the kitchen table at 9 o'clock that night, holding a letter she hadn't expected, with her hands very still and her chest very cold. She'd found it when she went to unpack the second of her 2 bags properly. She'd been putting it off. Unpacking properly felt like a declaration, like she was planting a flag, and she hadn't been ready for that. But she'd reached into the side pocket for her hairbrush and found the letter there where she'd tucked it 3 weeks ago and then tried to forget. She hadn't forgotten. She'd just been pretending. She put it on the table and looked at it. Her name and handwriting she knew too well. The postmark from a town 3 states west. She didn't open it. She didn't have to. She had read it enough times that the words were already inside her, sitting there the way old injuries sit inside a body, quiet until something presses on them. You can run from what you are, Delilah, but it'll follow you. It always does. Her mother's sister, Aunt Ruth, who had taken her in at 17 and made it clear every single day for 2 years that taking someone in was not the same as wanting them there, who had said when Delilah finally left at 19, "Good, one less thing I have to look at that reminds me of your mother." She hadn't contacted Ruth in 4 years. Ruth had found her anyway, the way Ruth always found her, using the network of churchwomen and small-town gossip that connected the entire middle of the country like an invisible telegraph. The letter had arrived 3 weeks ago, forwarded twice, and it said one simple thing dressed up in 3 paragraphs. "Come back where you belong," meaning nowhere. Delilah folded the letter, put it back in the envelope, set it on the table. Then she sat there in the quiet kitchen of a man she'd known for 2 days and felt the familiar weight of the question she could never fully escape. What if Ruth is right? What if this, all of this, the girls and the rabbit and the laughter in the yard and the way Griffin Hayes says her name, what if this is just another version of the same story? The one where you start to feel like you belong somewhere, and then you find out you were wrong. She was so deep in it that she didn't hear the footsteps until Eli was already in the kitchen doorway. The child had that quality, moving quietly, appearing without warning. She stood in her nightgown, with her hair loose, and her serious eyes finding Delilah's face in the lamplight, with the accuracy of something that went beyond ordinary sight. "You're not asleep," Eli said. "Neither are you." Eli came into the kitchen and sat down across from Delilah at the table, which was not what Delilah had expected. She'd expected the child to be retrievable, a glass of water, a bad dream, something manageable. Instead, Eli sat down with the deliberate weight of someone who had come on purpose. Her eyes moved to the letter on the table, back to Delilah's face. She said nothing. "Bad dream?" Delilah asked. "No. Eli folded her hands on the table. I heard you come downstairs. You want quiet, but the third step creaks, and that's how I know. She paused. It's how I knew when Papa couldn't sleep either, after Mama died. He'd come down and sit in the kitchen, and I'd lie in bed listening to him be sad. Delilah's chest tightened. You didn't go down to him? I tried once. He sent me back to bed. He said it was too late for little girls to be up. Eli's expression was neutral, reporting a fact, but underneath the neutrality was the residue of a 6-year-old lying in the dark, listening to her father, hurt, alone. I think he didn't want me to see. He was trying to protect you. I know that now. A pause. I didn't know it then. Then I just thought he wanted to be sad by himself. She looked at the letter again. Is that from someone who hurt you? Delilah looked at this child. 6 years old. 6 years old with those ancient eyes and that steady, undeflectable way of seeing things. She thought about lying. Not a harmful lie, just a redirect, the kind of comfortable vagueness that adults used with children to avoid difficult conversations. She prepared the words. Then she remembered. I won't do that because it wouldn't be honest, and I think you're too smart for promises that aren't honest. She'd said that to Eli at the breakfast table yesterday morning. Yes, she said. Eli nodded slowly, like she'd known and had needed the confirmation. Is it going to make you leave? No, Delilah said, and she felt, as she said it, the word land differently than it would have landed 24 hours ago. Not a professional statement of terms, but something that came from further down, from that place where she kept the things she was afraid of wanting. No, it's just old noise. Things people from your past say to remind you that you don't get to have good things. Eli was quiet for a moment. Papa says that some people are just broken in ways that make them break other people. He says it's not about the person they're breaking, it's about what's wrong with them. Delilah looked at her hands on the table. Your father is a wise man. He's mostly right about people, Eli agreed, with the measured acknowledgement of someone who maintained their own standards of verification. He was right about you. He doesn't know me yet. He said last night. Eli stopped. Her lips pressed together, a brief debate happening behind her eyes. What did he say? Delilah asked. I was supposed to be asleep. A pause. He was talking to himself. He does that sometimes when he thinks we're asleep. He says it helps him think. Another pause. Longer. He said you were the first person who'd walked into this house in 3 years who didn't make it feel smaller. The kitchen was very quiet. Delilah picked up the letter from the table and walked to the stove. She lifted the iron plate, dropped the letter in, and set the plate back down. Just like that. 20 seconds and the whole thing was gone. Eli watched this with wide eyes, and then something extraordinary happened. Eli smiled. A real smile. Unguarded and sudden. The kind that transformed her serious face completely into the face of the 6-year-old she actually was. Good, Eli said. Go back to bed, Delilah said. Yes, ma'am, Eli said, and padded back upstairs without another word, leaving Delilah standing at the stove with warm iron under her palms and something burning, clear and steady in her chest, that she was finally, cautiously, beginning to allow. The next 2 weeks moved fast. Ranch life had a rhythm to it that Delilah took to the way she took to most things, by watching first, then stepping in, then making it hers without making a show of it. She learned the stove's moods, the well pump's temper, which floorboards announced themselves and which stayed quiet. She learned that Maggie ate faster when she was excited about the day ahead and slower when something was bothering her, and that the way to find out which it was to ask about something completely unrelated and let the conversation find its way. She learned that Eli's silence was not the same thing as absence, that Eli was always listening, always cataloging, always working something out in that methodical, private way of hers. She learned, in the way you learn things you don't entirely mean to, that Griffin Hayes woke at 4:45 and spent 15 minutes on the porch before going to the barn, and that those 15 minutes were the only ones he took for himself all day. She learned that he never complained, not about the work and not about the weather, and not about Croft's circling, but that sometimes, at the end of supper, he would look around the table at his daughters, and there would be something in his face that was not quite peace, but was aimed in that direction, and that it lasted for exactly as long as it lasted before he stood and said, "All right, let's get this cleared up." And the moment was over. She learned that she looked for that moment every evening, that she had started orienting her day around it. That was the thing she had to be careful with. She was being careful. The cattle sale happened on a Wednesday, 14 days into the trial period. Griffin left before dawn and didn't come back until late afternoon. Delilah kept the girls busy. Baking, the rabbit, the endless project of Maggie's hair, Eli's reading, and she didn't let herself count the hours, which meant she counted every one. When the wagon came through the gate, the girls ran out. Delilah stayed on the porch. She saw him step down, and she watched his face, and she read it before he said a word. Good news. His shoulders were different, the set of them, the way they carried his body. She had learned his body's language the way she had learned the house's, by paying close attention, and those shoulders said, "It went through." He looked up and found her on the porch, and for one unguarded moment, before the girls reached him, before anyone said anything, he just looked at her with something full and uncomplicated in his face, and she felt it land in the center of her sternum, like a hand pressed there. Then Maggie hit him at full speed and said, "Did you bring anything?" And the moment dissolved into ordinary life, which was probably for the best. He had brought licorice. He produced it from his coat pocket while both girls climbed him like small, determined trees, and he looked over their heads at Delilah on the porch and said, "It went through. Full asking price." "I heard," she said. "The mortgage is handled. 2 months paid forward." He set Maggie down and straightened. "We're clear." "We're clear." She noticed the we. She didn't think he had. "I told you you'd make it," she said. He looked at her for another moment, just a moment, and said, "Yeah." Quiet, certain. "You did." The trouble with Croft came 4 days later. It didn't come as a man at the front door this time. It came as a piece of paper, official-looking, formally worded, delivered by the sheriff's deputy, with an apologetic expression that said he didn't like his errand and wasn't the one to blame for it. Griffin read it at the kitchen table. Delilah watched his face. She saw the moment he got to whatever the critical part was, because his jaw set and his hands went flat on the table in the way they went flat when he was working very hard to stay controlled. "What is it?" she asked. He looked up. The girls were outside. They were alone in the kitchen, and he looked at her with that stripped-open look. Not the soft version, the hard one. The one with something underneath it that was close to fear, though he would never call it that. "Croft is filing a petition with the county," he said. "He's claiming that this ranch is operating in violation of public decency statutes." He stopped. Delilah went very still. "Say that plainly." "He's saying that my housing an unmarried woman on the property, without a chaperone, without formal matrimonial arrangement, constitutes conduct unfit for a home with minor children." Griffin's voice was flat, stripped of everything except the words. "He's petitioning for a welfare review of the girls." The air in the kitchen changed. Delilah felt it in her body before she processed it in her mind. A cold wave moving through her, settling in her hands, her jaw. She recognized it. She had felt this before. The specific cold of someone using her existence as a weapon against something she cared about. "He's using me," she said. "He's using everything available to him," Griffin said. "That is what he does." "If they review, they won't find anything wrong with this household." His voice was hard and certain. "There is nothing wrong with this household."
They'll find a woman with no references in Red Hollow, a woman no one knows, living under your roof. She kept her voice even. She was going to stay even about this if it killed her. "Griffin, that is what they'll find." He looked at her. "Delilah, Martha Dunmore came here 2 weeks ago to warn you. The town is already talking." She stood up. She needed to be standing for this. "He knew that. He's been building this for weeks, waiting for the right moment." She breathed. In, out. "He's not coming after your land anymore. He's coming after your daughters to get your land." Griffin stood up too. The kitchen wasn't a large room, and it was suddenly smaller. "I know what he's doing." "Then you know that me being here makes it easier for him." The words cost her more than she'd expected. She felt them leave her mouth and felt the space they left behind. Griffin went very still. "I'm not saying I've done anything wrong," she said, before he could speak. "I'm saying I know how this works. I have spent my entire life watching people use the fact of me as a reason to dismiss things. As a reason to take things away from people. She stopped. She had been about to say something she hadn't decided to say yet. She pulled it back. "As a reason to take things. And I will not be the reason Croft gets leverage over this family." "You're not leaving," Griffin said. "I'm not. I'm saying we need to think about—" "You are not leaving." He said it with the same clean certainty he'd used with Eli at the breakfast table. No. No hedge, no qualification, just the word. "I hired you to do a job. You have done nothing to be ashamed of. My daughters—" His voice shifted, something cracking through the control. Just a hairline fracture, but she heard it. "My daughters need you here. And I am not going to let Alderman Croft dictate who is welcome in my home." Delilah stared at him. The cracking in his voice had opened something in the room, and neither of them had quite figured out what to do about it. "It's not that simple," she said. "Maybe not." He stepped closer. "Not much, just enough. But some things are worth being complicated for." She looked at him. He looked at her. The kitchen was absolutely silent, except for the distant sound of Maggie informing Chester about something in the yard. "There are options," she said carefully, "that we haven't—" "I know what the options are," he said. His voice had gone quieter, lower. "I've been sitting with them for 4 days." 4 days? Her breath came out differently. "You've known for 4 days?" "I wanted to handle it before it got to you." "That is exactly the kind of thing you said you wouldn't do." She held his gaze. "No information I can't handle. That's what we agreed." His jaw tightened. "I know. I'm telling you now." "What did you decide about the options?" He picked up his hat from the table. He turned it once between his fingers. He looked at it for a moment, the way he looked at things when he was deciding how to say something honest. Then he looked up. "I decided that the simplest answer to Croft's claim is to make the claim false," he said. "But that is not something I would do without asking you first. And I am aware that it is not a simple thing to ask." The room was very quiet. Delilah looked at him for a long, steady moment. This man who turned his hat in his hands when things mattered, who told his daughters the hard truth without flinching.
who had sat with a decision for 4 days because he'd wanted to protect her, and then had told her anyway because he'd promised her honesty. "You're asking me to marry you," she said. "I'm asking if you'd consider it." He kept her gaze. His voice was absolutely steady. "I'm not asking out of convenience, and I'm not asking to solve a problem. I'm asking because the last 2 weeks have been—" He stopped, started again. "I'm asking because I meant what Eli heard me say. This house is bigger with you in it, and I'd like it to stay that way." The sound from outside had stopped. The yard was quiet. The whole ranch was quiet. Delilah stood in the kitchen with her hands at her sides and felt every single thing she had ever armored herself against trying to come through at once. The wanting, the terror, the deep, bone-tired longing for something that would stay. And underneath all of it, like a root that had been growing in the dark for 2 weeks without permission, the truth she'd been most careful not to examine. She already knew the answer. She just needed a moment to let herself know it. "I'll need my own answers to some questions," she said. "Ask them," he said immediately. "Tomorrow." Her voice was not as steady as she wanted it. She took a breath. "Ask me again tomorrow, when I've had a night to make sure I'm answering with my head and not just—" She stopped. "Just what?" he asked quietly. She looked at him. Just him. All of him. The hat in his hands, and the honest eyes, and the 3 years of holding things together alone, and the daughters who checked on rabbits and said, "I'm glad you came," and meant it. "Tomorrow," she said. He nodded. He set his hat back on his head. He walked to the back door and paused with his hand on it, his back to her. "For what it's worth," he said, without turning around, "I've already got my answer. I'm just waiting on yours." He went out to the barn. Delilah stood in the kitchen for a long time, her hands pressed flat against the table, the same way she'd pressed them flat against her chest that first day on the platform, trying to hold herself together. Only this time, she realized, she wasn't trying to hold herself from falling apart. She was trying to hold herself still, long enough to let something in. She didn't sleep. Not really. She lay in the dark and listened to the cottonwoods and turned Griffin's words over the way you turn something fragile, carefully, slowly, afraid of what breaks if you grip too hard. "I've already got my answer. I'm just waiting on yours." She had spent 9 years building a life out of not needing anyone to wait on her, out of arriving and leaving on her own terms, of keeping her bags where she could reach them, of never letting a place get so far under her skin that leaving it would cost her something she couldn't afford to pay. She had been very good at it. She had perfected it. She had turned it into a kind of dignity. "I don't need, therefore I cannot be hurt." And she had worn that dignity like the most practical garment she owned. And now she was lying in a room that smelled like cedar and old quilts, in a house that had learned her footstep, listening to the breathing of 2 children down the hall, who said her name like it belonged in their mouths. And the dignity felt less like armor and more like a coat she'd been wearing indoors all summer. Hot. Unnecessary. Something she'd been keeping on out of habit, not need. She got up at 4:30, not because she heard anything, but because she couldn't lie still any longer, with all of it pressing on her. She dressed in the dark and went downstairs and put the coffee on, and stood at the kitchen window, and had the clearest, most honest conversation she'd had with herself in years. "You are afraid. Yes. You have been afraid this whole time. Yes. And it hasn't stopped you from doing a single thing since you got here." She stood with that. It was true. She had been afraid on the wagon ride from the depot, and she had braided Maggie's hair anyway. She had been afraid at the supper table that first night, and she had sat down and eaten with his family anyway. She had been afraid every morning since, and she had gotten up and made the coffee, and shown up, and kept her promise to Eli. You'll know. It won't just happen. And done all of it afraid every single day. Fear, it turned out, was not the obstacle she'd always treated it as. Fear was just the feeling you carried while you did the thing anyway. She heard the front door. 4:45, exactly on time. Griffin's 15 minutes on the porch. She poured a second cup of coffee. She carried both cups to the front door and opened it. He was standing at the porch rail with his back to her, hat in hand, looking at the dark sky going gray at the edges. He turned when he heard the door, and looked at her, and at the two cups, and something moved through his face, quick, unguarded, then managed. She held out the second cup. He took it. She stood beside him at the rail, and they were both quiet for a moment, watching the dark thin out. "I have questions," she said. "Ask them." "If this doesn't work," she started. "Delilah, let me finish." She held her cup with both hands. "If this doesn't work, I need to know the girls are protected from it. Whatever happens between us, they don't get the fallout. They've had enough fallout." "Agreed," he said, without hesitation. "And if I have an opinion about this ranch, about decisions, about money, about Croft, I expect to be heard, not managed, not protected from information. Heard." "You've made that requirement fairly clear," he said. The corner of his mouth moved. "I'm making it again." "Heard," he said. "Fully. Always." She looked at the sky. A long breath. Then, the real one. The one underneath the practical ones. The one she'd been circling all night. "I need to know that that I'm not a solution to a problem. That this isn't about the petition, or Croft, or the girls needing—" "Stop." His voice was quiet but firm. He turned toward her. "Look at me." She looked at him. "I told Eli. I didn't know she was listening, but I told her that you make this house bigger. That's not a problem being solved. That is a thing that is true." He held her gaze with that complete, unflinching steadiness that she had come to understand was just how he was built. He didn't look away from things, not the hard things, not the important things. "Croft's petition is a problem. You are not. You are—" He stopped. The muscle in his jaw moved. "You are the reason I've sat through supper for 2 weeks feeling like myself again. That is not nothing." The sky was getting lighter. She could hear the birds starting. "I'm not easy," she said. "I need you to know that. I'm not. I've been alone a long time and I have sharp edges and I will not sand them down to be comfortable to live with." "I know. You've known me 16 days. "I know," he said again, and the steadiness in it was not impatience or dismissal. It was a man saying, "I have seen your sharp edges, and I am not asking you to change them." It was a man saying, "I am not afraid of you." She had not had that before. She had not known until right now, standing in the early dark, with a cup of coffee, and her whole chest cracked open, how much she had needed someone to not be afraid of her. "Yes," she said. He went still. "That's my answer." She looked at him directly. "Yes." Griffin Hayes looked at her for a long moment. This man who managed everything quietly, who turned his hat in his hands when things mattered, who had sat with a decision for 4 days rather than pressure her. And the careful management went out of his face entirely, all at once, leaving something that was just him, plain and undefended and overwhelmed in the best possible way. He set his coffee cup on the rail.
He took hers and set it beside his. He took both her hands in his, which were warm and solid and real. And he said, "All right," in a voice that came from somewhere so much deeper than his chest that she felt it in her own. "All right," she said back. They stood like that while the sky finished deciding to be morning. She told the girls at breakfast. She had thought about how to do it. The right words, the right tone, age appropriate. Not too much, not too little. She had prepared a careful and reasonable explanation. What actually happened was that she and Griffin came in from the porch together, clearly having been there together. And Maggie took one look at both of their faces and said, at full volume, "Are you getting married?" Griffin said, "Maggie." "I knew it," Maggie said, to no one in particular and everyone in general. "I knew it, Eli. I told you." "You did not tell me," Eli said, with complete accuracy. "I thought it loudly," which is basically the same. It is not the same thing at all. "Girls," Delilah said. They both stopped. She sat down at the table. She looked at them, Maggie vibrating with barely contained delight. Eli sitting very still, with her hands flat on the table and her face working through something more complex than her sister's. She said, "Yes, we are. If that's all right with you both." Maggie said, "Yes," immediately, and with her whole body. Eli didn't say anything for a moment. Her eyes went from Delilah to her father and back to Delilah, and Delilah let her look. Didn't rush it, didn't fill the silence. "You said you'd tell us before you left," Eli said finally. "I did." "So you're not going to leave?" "No." Another silence. Eli looked down at her hands on the table. Her jaw was working, the calcified, prepared-for-loss jaw. But as Delilah watched, something gave way in it. Slowly, like ice in early spring, not all at once, but in pieces. The cold withdrawing from the surface and then deeper, until what was underneath could finally come up. Eli looked up. Her eyes were bright. She pressed her lips together hard, fighting it, then stopped fighting it. "Okay," she said, in a voice that was more breath than sound. Then she got up from the table, walked around to Delilah's chair, and put her arms around Delilah's neck from behind, and held on with the quiet ferocity of a child who had been carefully not hoping for something for a very long time, and had just been given permission to hope. Delilah put her hand over the small arms around her neck and held on back. Maggie promptly climbed onto Delilah's lap from the front, completing the situation, and said into her shoulder, "Can I call you Mama?" The kitchen went absolutely silent. Griffin made a sound. Delilah held both girls and looked at the ceiling and breathed through it. "You can call me whatever feels right," she said, when she could manage the words. "There's no rush." Maggie considered this for approximately 2 seconds. "Mama," she said decisively. Eli's arms tightened around her neck. Delilah looked at Griffin over both their heads. He was standing at the counter with his coffee cup forgotten in his hand and his face entirely open. No management, no control, nothing held back. He looked like a man seeing something he had given up expecting and had just gotten back. She held his gaze. He held hers. "We're going to be all right," she thought. And for the first time in 9 years, the thought didn't feel dangerous. It felt like a fact. Croft came 2 days later, not to the ranch this time. He was waiting outside the courthouse in town when Griffin drove in to file the formal response to the petition. He was standing on the steps in his expensive clothes with 2 other men, and he had the satisfied look of a man who thought he'd cornered something. Delilah was in the wagon. She had been clear on this point when Griffin had said he was going to town. "I'm going with you,"
she'd said. Delilah, this is my household too now. That's what you said yesterday when you asked me. I'm going. He hadn't argued further, because he understood by then that there were arguments worth having with her, and arguments that were just delay. She stepped down from the wagon and walked up the courthouse steps beside Griffin, and felt Croft's eyes on her the way she always felt the eyes of people who'd decided what she was before she opened her mouth. Hayes, Croft said. His eyes moved to Delilah.
The satisfied look shifted slightly. Not gone, but recalculating.
Alderman, Griffin said, I see you've brought your housekeeper? I've brought my fiancée, Griffin said. Simple, steady, not performing it, not making a production of it, just saying the word like it was a fact because it was. We'll be married end of the month. I thought you should know before you file that petition, since it changes the nature of the claims somewhat. Croft looked at Delilah. The recalculation was working fast now. She could see it, the way his prepared strategy was reshuffling itself. I see, he said. I imagine you do. Griffin held the man's gaze with a particular, quiet patience of someone who isn't angry, who is simply unmovable. Now, if you'll excuse us, we have business inside. Croft's jaw tightened. This isn't over, Hayes. No, Griffin agreed pleasantly. It probably isn't. But today it is. He walked up the steps and held the courthouse door, and Delilah walked through it, and neither of them looked back at Croft standing on the steps behind them, running out of moves. Inside, in the marble cool quiet of the clerk's office, Griffin let out a breath. Delilah glanced at him. You all right? She asked. Yes. He rolled his hat brim once. You? I've been told harder things than that man has. He looked at her with something that might have started as admiration and had somewhere become deeper, the way rivers go deeper in the middle, where no one can see the bottom. I know, he said. That's one of the things. What things? He looked at her steadily. The things I'm counting on. She looked back at him in the quiet marble light of the county courthouse, 2 days from a marriage she hadn't expected and couldn't imagine now not having. And she thought about the train platform, and the door slammed in her face, and the $4.60, and the bench in the July heat. And she thought about Eli's arms around her neck, and Maggie's mama, and the rabbit breathing in its box, and the lock shifting, just the lock at first, and then the door. Let's go home, she said. His face did the thing, the open, unmanaged thing, just for a moment. Then he settled his hat back on his head. Yes, ma'am, he said. They were married on a Saturday, at the end of July. Martha Dunmore came. She sat in the third row with a complicated expression that had worked its way over the course of a month from hostile to uncertain to something approaching respect. She brought a pie. Delilah thanked her for it and meant it, because whatever Martha Dunmore was, she had come, and that was the thing that mattered. The girls wore clean dresses with their hair properly braided. Maggie's by Delilah's hands that morning, Eli's by her own, though she'd let Delilah add the ribbon. Griffin said his vows looking directly at her. No ceremony in it, no performance. Just the words said to her face the same way he said everything that mattered. Plainly, clearly, meaning every syllable. She said hers back the same way. No more precision as armor. No more careful management of the wanting. She stood in front of this man and this town and said the words with her whole chest open and her hands steady and her sharp edges entirely intact. And she meant them the way you mean things when you finally stopped being afraid of meaning them. Maggie cried, which she had predicted. Eli did not cry, which she had also predicted. But Eli held Delilah's hand for the entire walk back to the wagon, and didn't let go until she had to. And that was worth every ceremony in the world. On the ride home, Maggie fell asleep against Eli's shoulder, exactly as she had on the first ride. The same road, the same horse, the same late afternoon light. And Eli stayed awake, watching, just as she had then. But this time, Eli looked at Delilah and said, quietly, with a certainty that had come from somewhere deeper than hope, "You're the staying kind." Delilah thought about all the roads she'd taken, all the places she'd arrived and left. The letter at the bottom of the stove, the train platform, and the locked door, and the bench in the July heat, which had turned out not to be an ending at all. She looked at Eli. She looked at Griffin beside her, with the reins in his steady hands. She looked at the road going forward, all the way to the gate of the ranch that was hers now, the house with the cedar chest, and the log cabin quilt, and the window that faced the creek. "Yeah," she said, "I am." And she was.